Your name is called. You stand up. You walk toward the front of the room. 20 people are looking at you, maybe 50, maybe hundreds. You know your topic. You practiced what you wanted to say. Your English is good enough. But suddenly, your heart starts beating faster. Your hands feel uncomfortable. Your mouth becomes dry. And the first sentence you practice 10 times completely disappears from your mind. This is public speaking. And if you've ever felt nervous speaking in front of other people, you're definitely not alone. But here's something important. Speaking confidently in public doesn't mean you never feel nervous. It means you know what to do when nervousness appears. And for English learners, public speaking can feel even more difficult. You're not only thinking about your message, you're thinking about your grammar, your pronunciation, your vocabulary, your accent, and sometimes you're so busy trying not to make mistakes that you forget the most important thing, communicating with your audience. So in today's lesson, we're going to learn practical English for public speaking. Not complicated theories, not advice you'll forget tomorrow. You'll learn how to prepare your message, how to start speaking without sounding nervous, how to organize your ideas clearly, how to use simple English when you forget a word, how to keep people listening, and how to finish your speech in a strong and natural way. And please, don't only listen. Imagine yourself standing in front of an audience. Repeat the useful expressions aloud. Practice the examples, because public speaking is a skill, and skills improve when you use them. We'll learn everything through 5 practical lessons. Lesson number 1, how to prepare what you want to say. Lesson number 2, how to start speaking with confidence. Lesson number 3, how to organize your ideas and speak clearly. Lesson number 4, how to handle nervousness, mistakes, and forgotten words. And finally, lesson number 5, how to keep your audience listening and finish strong. Each lesson will give you practical expressions, examples, and situations you can actually use at school, at work, during presentations, in meetings, or whenever you need to speak in front of other people. So imagine you're standing backstage. Your presentation begins in 5 minutes. You have your notes in your hand. You know people are waiting. The question is, are you going to memorize every sentence, read directly from your notes, or prepare your message in a way that allows you to speak naturally? That's exactly where we begin. Let's start with lesson number 1, how to prepare what you want to say. Before we start, can I ask you one question? A year from now, will your English be better than it is today? Or will you still be saying, I'll start next week? The truth is, most people don't fail because English is difficult. They fail because they never truly commit to it. That's why, for a limited time, I've reduced the price of the Native Flow English coaching experience to just $5. Not because it's worth only $5, but because I don't want money to be the reason you never start. For less than the price of a coffee, you can begin building a skill that can stay with you for the rest of your life. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Click the link in the description. Join us today, and I'll see you inside. Now, let's begin today's lesson. Lesson number 1, how to prepare what you want to say. Good public speaking begins before you stand in front of the audience. It begins with preparation. But preparation doesn't mean memorizing every single sentence. Many English learners make this mistake. They write a complete speech, Memorize it word for word and try to repeat it perfectly. Then something goes wrong. They forget one sentence, and suddenly they don't know what to say next. That's why a better strategy is to prepare your ideas, not every word. Start by asking yourself one simple question. What do I want my audience to remember? Maybe you're giving a presentation about technology. You might have 3 main ideas. Technology saves time. Technology creates opportunities. Technology also creates new problems. Those 3 ideas become the structure of your speech. Now, instead of memorizing 500 words, you only need to remember your main points. This makes speaking much easier and more natural. Here's another useful tip. Write keywords on your notes, not complete paragraphs. For example, problem, example, solution, final message. When you look at these words, they remind you what to talk about, but they don't force you to read. Now let's imagine you're preparing a short presentation about learning English. You could organize your notes like this. Reason for learning English. My biggest difficulty. What helped me improve? Advice for other learners. Then you practice explaining each idea naturally. Maybe the first time, your explanation takes 30 seconds. The second time, you remember a better example. The third time, you speak more clearly. That's how practice should work. You're not trying to repeat exactly the same words. You're becoming more comfortable with your message. Now let's talk about useful English expressions for organizing your preparation. You can practice saying, "The main point I want to make is," "There are 3 things I'd like to talk about." Let me give you an example. "The reason this matters is," I'll come back to that point later. These expressions give you something very valuable. Time to think. Imagine you forget exactly what you wanted to say. Instead of becoming silent, you can say, "Let me explain what I mean." Then continue using simpler words. That's real communication. Now here's another important lesson. Practice aloud. Thinking about your speech isn't the same as speaking it. You may understand every sentence perfectly in your mind, but when you say it aloud, you discover which words are difficult to pronounce, which sentences are too long, and where you naturally need to pause. Record yourself if possible. Listen once. Don't criticize every small mistake. Ask useful questions. Was my message clear? Was I speaking too quickly? Did I explain my examples well? Then improve one thing and practice again. Finally, prepare your first sentence and your final sentence carefully. Why? Because the beginning helps you enter the speech with confidence, and the ending helps you leave your audience with a clear message. You don't need to memorize everything in between. Know your ideas, know your examples, know where you're going. That's the real purpose of preparation, because when you understand your message clearly, you don't need to remember every word. You can focus on the people listening to you, and that's when you begin to sound like a speaker, instead of someone simply repeating a memorized text. Lesson number 2. How to start speaking with confidence. The first few seconds of a speech can feel like the hardest part. You walk to the front, people look at you, the room becomes quiet, and your brain says, "Say something." Many English learners begin like this. "Hello. Today I'm going to talk about..." There's nothing grammatically wrong with that, but if you want people to listen, you can start in a more interesting way. You could ask a question. How many of you have ever been afraid to speak in front of other people? You could share a surprising fact. Most people spend hours preparing presentations that their audience forgets within days. Or you could begin with a short personal experience. 3 years ago, I stood in front of a classroom and completely forgot what I wanted to say. A strong opening gives your audience a reason to listen, but it also helps you. Why? Because when you prepare your opening carefully, you know exactly how to begin. You don't stand there searching for your first words. Now imagine you're giving a presentation at work. You could say, "Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you a question." Then ask something related to your topic. Or, "Thank you for being here. Today, I'd like to show you why this problem matters to all of us." These expressions sound natural and professional. Now here's another important tip. Don't rush. When nervous people begin speaking, they often speak too quickly. They want to finish as soon as possible. But speaking quickly can make you more nervous. Instead, stand comfortably. Look at the audience. Pause for 1 or 2 seconds. Then begin. A short pause doesn't make you look unprepared. It can make you look more confident. Now let's talk about your voice. You don't need to shout, but people need to hear you clearly. Speak slightly louder than you would in a normal conversation, and don't let every sentence sound exactly the same. Emphasize important words. For example, "This isn't just a small problem. It's a problem that affects every one of us." Your voice should help the audience understand what matters. Now imagine you start speaking and make a mistake. You say the wrong word. What should you do? Continue. Most of the audience probably won't care. If the mistake changes your meaning, simply say, "Sorry, let me say that again." Then correct yourself and continue. Don't apologize for every small grammar mistake. Don't say, "Sorry for my English," at the beginning of your presentation. That immediately focuses attention on your mistakes instead of your message. Your job isn't to prove that your English is perfect. Your job is to communicate something clearly. Here's a useful opening example. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin with a simple question. When was the last time you changed your mind about something important? Today, I'd like to talk about why being willing to change our minds can help us make better decisions." Clear, simple, and interesting. So remember, prepare your opening. Give people a reason to listen. Pause before you begin. Speak clearly. And don't allow one small mistake to destroy your confidence. Because once you successfully get through the first few sentences, something usually changes. You stop thinking about everyone watching you and start thinking about the message you want to share. And that's exactly where confident public speaking begins. Lesson number 3, how to organize your ideas and speak clearly. You begin your presentation confidently. Your opening gets people's attention. The audience is listening. But now, you have another challenge. How do you keep your speech clear and easy to follow? Because having good ideas isn't enough. Your audience needs to understand how those ideas connect. Imagine listening to someone who jumps from one idea to another. First, they talk about technology, then education. Then suddenly, their childhood. Then they return to technology. Even if their English is perfect, the audience will become confused. That's why every good speaker needs a clear structure. One of the easiest methods is simple. Tell your audience what you're going to explain. Explain it, then remind them of the most important message. For example, today I'd like to share 3 reasons why learning English can change your life. Immediately, your audience knows what to expect. Then you can say, let's start with the first reason. Later. Now let's move to the second point. And finally, the last thing I'd like to talk about is these expressions act like signs on a road. They tell your audience where you are and where you're going next. Now here's another important expression. Let me give you an example. Examples make ideas easier to understand. Imagine you say, practice is important for improving your English. That's clear. But now add an example. Let me give you an example. Imagine 2 students. One studies grammar for 3 hours every Sunday. The other speaks English for 15 minutes every day. After 6 months, the second student may feel much more comfortable speaking because English has become part of their daily life. The example makes your message easier to remember. Now let's talk about long sentences. When English learners want to sound intelligent, they sometimes use complicated sentences. But public speaking isn't an English exam. Your audience can't go back and read your sentence again. They need to understand you immediately. So keep important ideas simple. Use shorter sentences. Pause between them. For example, instead of saying, the development of communication skills is extremely important because it allows individuals to effectively express complex ideas in various professional environments. You could say, communication skills matter. They help you express your ideas clearly, and they can make a big difference at work. Same basic message, much easier to understand. Now imagine you want to move from one idea to another. You can say, now let's look at another important point. This brings me to my next idea. So what does this mean for us? Here's why this matters. These expressions give your speech a natural flow. Now here's one more important skill. Repeat your main message, not every sentence. Only the ideas you really want people to remember. You can say, the key thing to remember is, or, if you remember only one thing from this section, remember this. Repetition helps your audience understand what matters most. So when you're speaking in public, don't try to impress people with complicated English. Guide them, use clear transitions, give examples, keep your sentences understandable, repeat your main message. Because a great speaker isn't the person who uses the most difficult words. A great speaker is the person who makes difficult ideas easy to understand. And when your audience can follow your ideas without getting lost, they're much more likely to keep listening. Lesson number 4, how to handle nervousness, mistakes, and forgotten words. You're halfway through your presentation. Everything is going well. Then suddenly, your mind goes blank. You forget your next point. The audience is waiting. And those few seconds feel like an entire minute. What should you do? First, don't panic. Forgetting a word or losing your place doesn't mean your presentation is ruined. It happens to experienced speakers too. The important thing is knowing how to recover naturally. One useful expression is, let me think about how to explain this. This gives you a few seconds to organize your thoughts. You can also say, let me put that another way. Or, what I'm trying to say is. These expressions are extremely useful for English learners because they allow you to continue speaking even when the perfect sentence doesn't come to mind. Now imagine you completely forget your next point. Don't stand silently trying to remember your exact words. Look at your notes, pause, then say, "Now let's move on to the next point." Your audience doesn't know exactly what you plan to say. They won't know that you forgot something unless you tell them. Now let's talk about nervousness. Many people try to hide every sign of nervousness. But fighting nervousness can make it stronger. Instead, focus on speaking slowly. When people become nervous, they often rush. Their sentences become shorter, their breathing changes, and mistakes happen more frequently. So pause between important ideas. For example, "There are many reasons this matters." Pause. "But today I want to focus on just one." Pause. The effect it has on our daily lives. Those pauses give you time to think and give your audience time to understand. Now imagine you make a grammar mistake. Should you stop and correct every error? No. If people understand your message, continue speaking. But if your mistake changes the meaning, you can say, "Sorry, let me correct that." Then say the sentence again. What if you forget an English word? Describe it. Imagine you forget the word microphone. You can say, "The device we use to make our voice louder." Maybe someone gives you the word. Then you continue. That's communication. You don't need to know every word. You need to know how to keep communicating. Now here's another difficult situation. Someone asks you a question, and you don't know the answer. Don't invent an answer. You can say, "That's a good question. I don't have the exact answer right now, but I'll look into it." Or, "I'm not completely sure, so I don't want to give you incorrect information." These answers can make you sound more professional, not less. And if you don't understand the question, say, "Could you repeat the question, please?" Or, "Could you explain what you mean?" Remember, public speaking confidence doesn't come from never making mistakes. It comes from knowing that when something goes wrong, you can recover, you can pause, use simpler words, check your notes, correct yourself, ask for clarification, and continue. Because the audience doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to stay clear, calm, and focused on your message. And once you learn how to recover from mistakes, public speaking becomes much less frightening. Lesson number 5. How to keep your audience listening and finish strong. You've prepared your message. You started confidently. Your ideas are clear. You handled your nervousness. Now you have one final challenge: keeping people interested until the end. Because an audience can hear your words without truly listening. So how do you keep their attention? One simple technique is to speak directly to them. Ask questions. Have you ever experienced this? What would you do in this situation? Why do you think this happens? You don't always need an answer. These questions make people think, and when people think, they become part of your presentation. Now here's another useful technique. Tell short stories. Imagine you're speaking about failure. You could say, "Failure teaches us important lessons." That's true, but it's not very memorable. Instead, say, "Last year, I applied for an opportunity I really wanted. I prepared for weeks, but I didn't get it. At first, I felt disappointed. Later, I realized that experience showed me exactly what I needed to improve." A short story gives your audience something they can imagine, and that makes your message easier to remember. Now let's talk about another common mistake: trying to include too much information. You don't need to tell your audience everything you know. Choose the most important ideas. Explain them clearly. Give examples. Then move forward. Remember, people are more likely to remember 3 clear ideas than 15 confusing ones. You can also use expressions that bring the audience's attention back. Here's the important part. Think about this for a moment. This is what I want you to remember. These expressions tell your listeners, pay attention. Something important is coming. Now imagine you're reaching the end of your presentation. Don't suddenly say, "Okay, that's all, thank you." Your ending deserves preparation too. First, signal that you're finishing. You can say, "Before I finish, I'd like to leave you with one final thought." Or, "Let me end with the most important message from today's presentation." Then summarize your main idea. For example, today we've seen that confident public speaking isn't about being perfect. It's about preparing your ideas, speaking clearly, connecting with your audience, and knowing how to continue when something goes wrong. Finally, give your audience something to remember: a question, a challenge, or one powerful sentence. For example, the next time you're afraid to speak in front of people, don't ask yourself, "What if I make a mistake?" Ask yourself, "What important message might people miss if I stay silent?" Then pause, look at your audience, and finish naturally. Thank you for listening. That's enough. You don't need a complicated ending. You need a clear one. So remember, involve your audience, ask questions, use short stories. Don't overload people with information. Bring their attention back to your most important ideas, and prepare your ending as carefully as your opening. Because people may forget many of the sentences you say, but they'll often remember how your message made them think. Public speaking in English can feel difficult, but you don't need perfect grammar, you don't need the most advanced vocabulary, and you don't need to eliminate nervousness completely. You need preparation, clear ideas, useful expressions, practice, and the courage to continue speaking when everything doesn't go perfectly. So practice aloud, speak slowly, focus on your message, and remember, the goal of public speaking isn't to impress people with your English. The goal is to make them understand, think, and remember. Thank you so much for listening. Keep practicing your English. Keep using your voice. And the next time you stand in front of an audience, focus less on being perfect and more on having something worth saying.